This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. First, the headlines. Kenya, rescue operations underway after rain causes floodwaters. Gaza, Health Ministry reports 32 people killed in 24 hours. Bangladesh, Japan to spend $2 million to help Rohingya. Austria, Russian infiltration revealed as authorities arrest spy. United States, crowds witness total solar eclipse. Australia, government appoints ex-defense chief to investigate Israeli strike.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond.
And now the news in details. Police and Red Cross workers are engaged in a rescue operation at a swollen river in northern Kenya after a bus carrying an unknown number of passengers was swept away by floodwaters. Police say some of the passengers managed to escape just before the bus was submerged, while others climbed onto the roof. It is not clear how many are still trapped inside the bus. The incident happened just hours after Kenya's road agency announced the closure of another section of the same road that was flooded after the Tana River swelled due to continuing heavy rains. Kenya Red Cross said it has dispatched 2 rescue boats to ensure swift and effective response. The government had on Monday issued a flood alert to residents of Tana River and Lamu counties after a dam upstream was breached by flooding. Israeli military has announced the killing of a Hezbollah commander during an overnight airstrike in Lebanon. Ali Ahmed Hussein of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force was eliminated by Israeli jets in the As-Sotaniya area in southern Lebanon. In a statement issued on Monday, the Israeli military accused Hussein of attacks against its forces in recent months. Condemning the attack, the United Nations Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Joanna Roneka, and the commander of the UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon, Aroldo Lazaro, said the violence must stop. Meanwhile, dozens of rockets have been launched from Lebanon into the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Egyptian officials said Tuesday that mediators have presented a new ceasefire proposal to Hamas and Israel that would include a 6-week pause in fighting and the swap of 40 Hamas-held hostages for at least 700 Palestinians imprisoned by Israel. The proposal was presented to delegations from Hamas and Israel during the latest round of negotiation in Cairo over the weekend, according to the officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the negotiations. Among the Palestinian prisoners to be freed would be dozens convicted of killing Israelis during attacks by militant groups. The officials said Hamas would be required to provide a list of the hostages it will release, as well as a list of Palestinian prisoners whose freedom it seeks. The proposal also includes the return of a significant number of Palestinians to northern Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled the northern half of Gaza in the early stages of the war, heeding Israeli evacuation orders. The vast majority of Gaza's 2.3 million people are now crammed into the southern half. The proposal stipulates that Israel gradually dismantle checkpoints it had built on a new road that split the Strip in half to prevent the return of Palestinians to the north. Hamas has said it is reviewing the proposal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has escalated his pledge to invade the southern Gaza city of Rafah, declaring there is a date. Netanyahu has repeatedly said Israel must send ground forces into Rafah, saying it is Hamas's last stronghold in Gaza. But the international community, including the U.S., opposes the operation, saying the roughly 1.4 million civilians seeking shelter there will be in danger. Israel has insisted it has a plan to protect the civilians. In a video statement Monday, Netanyahu said the Rafah operation is essential for victory. He said it will happen, there is a date, without elaborating. He spoke as Israeli negotiators were in Cairo discussing international efforts to broker a ceasefire deal with Hamas. The Israeli army said its forces shot dead a Palestinian woman in the northern West Bank on Monday after she attempted to stab a soldier at a checkpoint. The army said the incident took place at the Tyre Seir checkpoint near the northern West Bank town of Tubas. In a statement, the Palestinian Health Ministry identified the deceased as a young woman but did not state her name or age. At least 460 Palestinians in East Jerusalem and the West Bank have been killed by Israeli fire since the Israel-Hamas war erupted 6 months ago, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Many have been shot dead in armed clashes, some while attempting to stab Israeli forces and others for throwing stones at troops. Press has reported on several cases where Palestinians have been shot dead for posing no apparent threat to nearby troops. Knife attacks by Palestinian women are rare. A pair of mapping experts say Israel's offensive in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis appears to have left over half of the city's buildings with damage or destruction visible from space. As of last week, over 55% of the city's buildings were likely damaged or destroyed, according to an analysis of the Copernicus Sentinel-1 satellite data by Chorus Scare of the CUNY Graduate Center and Jamon van den Hoek of Oregon State University. They say that accounts for 45,000 buildings. Still, the damage in Khan Yunis and other parts of the Strip's south is considerably less than in the north of Gaza, where the researchers estimate 70% of buildings were likely damaged or destroyed. Israel's ground and aerial bombardment campaign, begun after the Hamas attack October 7, has wreaked unprecedented damage on the Strip, leveling entire apartment buildings and leaving much of the territory in ruins, a moonscape from war. Israel withdrew its last ground troops from Khan Yunis on Sunday, marking the end of a key phase in its war against Hamas. An Israeli official confirms that Israel is purchasing 40,000 tents to prepare for the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Israel says Rafah is Hamas's last stronghold and is vowing to send ground troops into the city, but the international community, including the U.S., opposes the offensive, saying it would endanger Palestinian civilians. More than 1 million Palestinians, over half of Gaza's population, have fled to Rafah after being displaced by fighting elsewhere in the territory. Israel has said it has a plan to evacuate civilians ahead of its offensive, and Israel's Defense Ministry on Monday published a tender seeking a supplier of tents. The Israeli officials, speaking on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak to the media, said the tents were part of the Rafah preparations. The health ministry in Gaza on Monday said the bodies of 32 people killed in Israel's bombardment have been brought to hospitals in the beleaguered territory in the past 24 hours. Hospitals also received 47 wounded people. It said the fresh fatalities brought the death toll in the Strip to 33,207 since the war began on October 7, it said. The ministry doesn't differentiate between civilians and combatants, but said 2/3 of the dead are children and women. The Israeli military says it has killed 12,000 militants without providing evidence. The ministry said 75,933 people have been wounded. The ministry said many casualties remain under the rubble and first responders have been unable to retrieve them amid the relentless bombing. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have called on Israel to halt its military operations in Gaza and seek a peaceful solution to the conflict in line with UN resolutions. The two countries made the demands in a joint statement on Monday after a meeting between Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Mecca. The two sides called for international efforts to halt Israeli military operations in Gaza, mitigate humanitarian impact, and underscored the imperative for the international community to pressure Israel to cease hostilities, adhere to international law, and facilitate unhindered humanitarian aid access to Gaza, according to the statement. They also discussed the need for a peace process in accordance with UN resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative aimed at finding a just and comprehensive solution for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Iran's foreign minister Monday accused the United States of giving Israel the green light for a strike on its consulate building in Syria that killed 7 Iranian military officials, including 2 generals. Hossein Abdullahian reiterated Tehran's vows that it will respond to the attack, widely blamed on Israel, that appeared to signify an escalation of Israel's targeting of military officials from Iran, which supports militant group fighting Israel in Gaza and along its border with Lebanon. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, in an address Monday, reiterated the Iran-backed group's support for Tehran military response to the attack that killed General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a senior military official in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, and worsened fears of the war spiraling into the rest of the Middle East. Since the war in Gaza began 6 months ago, clashes have increased between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah. Hamas, which rules Gaza and attacked Israel on October 7, is also backed by Iran and as well as an umbrella group of Iraqi militias targeting U.S. military bases and positions in Syria and Iraq. Though Israel has regularly conducted strikes targeting Iranian military officials and allies, Zahedi's death was the most significant blow for Tehran since a U.S. drone targeted and killed Quds Force chief General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 in Baghdad. I'd like to say with a very loud voice from here in Damascus that America has a responsibility in what happened and must be held responsible. Amir Abdullahian told reporters in Damascus during a visit where he met his Syrian counterpart Faisal Mekdad, who condemned both the strike and Israel's offensive in Gaza. Amir Abdullahian also met President Bashar Assad, with whom he discussed Gaza and the wider situation in the region, a statement from Assad's office said. The Iranian foreign minister, who earlier that day inaugurated the opening of a new consular section in a nearby building, justified his claims by saying that Washington and 2 European countries did not condemn the attack on the diplomatic building. He said that failure to condemn the attack indicates that Washington had given the green light to Israel to commit this crime. The Biden administration has insisted that it had no advance knowledge of the airstrike. Washington is Israel's vital military ally. Israel, which rarely acknowledges strikes against Iranian targets, said it had no comment on the strike in the Syrian capital. However, Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh said last week that the U.S. has accessed Israel was responsible. Initially, after the strikes, Iranian state media said Zahedi led the Quds Force in Lebanon and Syria until 2016. Then, in a public address Monday, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said Zahedi was a key figure for the Lebanese group and had 3 4-year stints in the tiny Mediterranean country. Nasrallah, like Syria and other key allies of Tehran, have said they remain committed to backing Iran. Millions of Indonesians are packing bus and train stations, airports and highways as they head to hometowns to celebrate Thursday's Eid al-Fitr festival with family. The Transportation Ministry expects the largest movement of people in Indonesia's history. The agency is projecting the number of travelers heading home could reach 193 million, or nearly 72% of the population, up from 124 million, or 46%, last year. Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim-majority country, and every year there is a vast exodus of people from urban centers across the vast archipelago to more rural hometowns to celebrate the end of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan. The homecoming tradition is known as Mudik. In the capital, Jakarta, thousands of people have filled bus and train stations every day over the past week. More than 1.1 million people are expected to depart the greater Jakarta area to return to hometowns. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida begins a much-anticipated visit to Washington on Tuesday, aiming to spotlight shared concerns about provocative Chinese military action in the Pacific and at a rare moment of public difference between the two nations over a Japanese company's plan to buy an iconic U.S. company. Kishida and his wife will stop by the White House Tuesday evening ahead of Wednesday's official visit and formal state dinner as President Joe Biden looks to celebrate a decades-long ally he sees as the cornerstone of his Indo-Pacific policy. Kishida will be the fifth world leader honored by Biden with a state dinner since he took office in 2021. Ahead of the White House visit, Kishida is set to visit Arlington National Cemetery and stop by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Tuesday. Biden and Kishida on Wednesday will hold talks and take part in a joint news conference before Biden feats the Japanese leader with the state dinner in the East Room. The Prime Minister has also been invited to address a joint meeting of Congress. On Thursday, he will be just the second Japanese leader to address the body. Shinzo Abe gave a speech to Congress in 2015. The visit comes after Biden announced last month that he opposes the planned sale of Pittsburgh-based U.S. Steel to Nippon Steel of Japan, exposing a marked rift in the partnership. At the very moment the two leaders aim to reinforce it, Biden argued in announcing his opposition that the U.S. needs to maintain strong American steel companies powered by American steelworkers. Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, Biden's envoy to Tokyo, sought Monday to downplay the impact of Biden's opposition to the U.S. steel acquisition to the relationship. Emanuel noted that in February, the Biden administration approved a plan that would drive billions of dollars in revenue to a U.S.-based subsidiary of the Japanese company Mitsui for crane production in the United States. Japan's Nippon Foundation will spend $2 million to help move tens of thousands more Rohingya refugees to a remote island in Bangladesh and provide them with skills, training, and the charity's chairman said, speaking to press on Sunday after a visit to Hashan Char. Yohei Sasakawa praised the support the government has provided to refugees on the island and said it is a step towards returning them to Myanmar. Some 700,000 Rohingya fled Myanmar for Bangladesh after August 2017, when the military in Buddhist-majority Myanmar began a harsh crackdown following an attack by insurgents. The crackdown included rapes, killings, and the torching of thousands of homes, and was termed ethnic cleansing by global rights groups and the UN, while the United States called it genocide. Efforts to repatriate refugees to Myanmar under a 2017 agreement meditated by China have failed at least twice and seem only more distant as the security situation worsens. Fighting has spread across much of Myanmar as the ruling junta loses ground to rebel and separatist groups in the country. Long-running civil war. Sasakawa, who also serves as Japan's special envoy for national reconciliation in Myanmar, said that they'll need jobs, training to return. After their return to Myanmar, if they have no skill whatsoever, then they would end up living poorly in the country. So having the skill training in Busan Cha is going to help them greatly. The Nippon Foundation will fund moving some 40,000 Rohingya to the islands, Sakawa said, while Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said the refugees will not be forced to return to Myanmar. She has urged the international community to put pressure on the Buddhist majority country to make safe return possible. More than 1 million Rohingya refugees live in crowded camps near the coastal city of Cox's Bazar along the border with Myanmar. Austria faces its biggest espionage scandal in decades as the arrest of a former intelligence officer brings to light evidence of extensive Russian infiltration, lacks official oversight and behavior worthy of a spy novel. Egisto Ott was arrested March 29th. The 86-page arrest warrant obtained by press alleges, among other things, that he handed over cell phone data of former high-ranking Austrian officials to Russian intelligence, helped plot a burglary at prominent journalist's apartment, and wrote up suggestions for improvement after a Russian-ordered killing in Germany. Ott is suspected of having provided sensitive information to Jan Marsalek, a fugitive fellow Austrian wanted on suspicion of fraud since the collapse in 2020 of German payment company Wirecard, where he was the chief operating officer. The warrant says chat messages provided by British authorities link Marsalek directly to the Russian intelligence agency, FSB. German and Austrian media have reported that Marsalek is believed to have had connections to Russian intelligence since at least 2014. He is now thought to be in Russia. Thomas Regler, a historian and espionage expert affiliated with the Austrian Center for Intelligence, Propaganda and Security Studies, said the case has the potential for one of the biggest espionage stories in recent Austrian history. The case is special given its international dimension and the fact that it is not only about espionage but also about the infiltration of the Austrian political system and the weakening of the country's internal security, he said. Austria, which was located next to the Iron Curtain during the Cold War and long had good connections with Moscow, is a European Union member with a policy of military neutrality and a long-standing reputation as a spying center. Turkey says it is restricting the export of dozens of products to Israel, including aluminium, steel, construction materials, and chemical fertilizers, over Israel's military actions in Gaza. The decision, announced Tuesday, came a day after Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Ankara would impose measures against Israel for rejecting a request for Turkish military cargo planes to join an operation to airdrop aid to Gaza. He said Turkey would continue the measures until Israel declares a ceasefire and allows the uninterrupted flow of aid to Gaza. The Turkish Ministry of Trade issued a list of 54 products subject to the export restrictions. This decision will remain in effect until Israel declares an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as part of its obligations arising from international law and allows a sufficient and uninterrupted flow of the humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, the ministry said. NATO member Turkey is among the strongest critics of Israel's military actions in Gaza. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government has been criticized domestically for not halting trade with Israel. The Vatican on Monday declared gender-affirming surgery and surrogacy as grave violations of human dignity, putting them on par with abortion and euthanasia as practices that it said reject God's plan for human life. The Vatican Doctrine Office issued Infinite Dignity, a 20-page declaration that has been in the works for 5 years. After substantial revision in recent months, it was approved March 25th by Pope Francis, who ordered its publication. From a pope who has made outreach to the LGBTQ+ community a hallmark of his papacy, the document was received as a setback, albeit predictable, by trans-Catholic Catholics, but its message was also consistent with the Argentine Jesuits' long-standing belief that while trans people should be welcomed in the church, so-called gender ideologies should not. In its most eagerly anticipated section, the Vatican repeated its rejection of gender theory or the idea that one's biological sex can change. It said God created man and woman as biologically different, separate beings, and said people must not tinker with that or try to make oneself God. It follows that any sex change intervention, as a rule, risk threatening the unique dignity the person has received from the moment of conception, the document said. It distinguished between gender-affirming surgeries, which it rejected, and genital abnormalities that are present at birth or that develop later. Those abnormalities can be resolved with the help of healthcare professionals, it said. Advocates for LGBTQ+ Catholics immediately criticized the document as outdated, harmful, and contrary to the stated goal of recognizing the infinite dignity of all God's children. They warned it could have real-world effects on trans people, fueling anti-trans violence and discrimination. While it lays out a wonderful rationale for why each human being, regardless of condition in life, must be respected, honored, and loved, it does not apply this principle to gender diverse people, said Francis de Bernardo of New Ways Ministry, which advocates for LGBTQ+ Catholics. Nicolette Burbach led experts in social and environmental justice at the London Jesuit Center, said the document showed the Vatican continues to fail to engage with queer and feminist approaches to the body, which it simply dismisses as supposedly subjecting both the body and human dignity itself to human whims. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We return after this break.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today. Only around 8 a.m.
people into the country illegally. That is amazing.
Honorable
You human
On the
trafficker.
point of order.
Honorable
You are a human
On the
trafficker.
point.
Welcome back. This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. Pope Francis met Monday with relatives of hostages taken by Hamas on October 7, marking the 6th-month anniversary of the attack in southern Israel, with an hour-long audience. The Vatican released photos of the encounter, showing the relatives of several of the hostages sitting in a semicircle in front of Francis in his private library in the Apostolic Palace. Each one held a poster with a photo and the name of their loved one. It was the second time Francis has met with relatives of the hostages. On November 22nd, he met with a delegation of Israelis and then, separately, a delegation of Palestinians whose relatives had been harmed during the long Mideast conflict. Francis has called for the immediate release of the hostages and a ceasefire in Gaza and for humanitarian aid to urgently reach desperate Palestinians. U.S. President Joe Biden was unveiling new plans Monday to reduce student loan debt for millions of Americans in a fresh bid to win over young voters who will be crucial in November's election. The Democrats' proposals came after his initial bigger ambitions to cancel several hundred billions of dollars of debt were struck down by the conservative-dominated U.S. Supreme Court in June. The plans would wipe out accrued interest for 23 million borrowers, cancel all student debt for 4 million others, and give at least $5,000 in debt relief to over 10 million borrowers, it said. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre added that Biden would use every tool available to cancel student debt, no matter how many times Republican elected officials tried to stand in his way. The new plans were entirely consistent with the court's decision last year, which the White House had studied carefully. Republican presidential His statement came after questions had swirled for weeks over what his stance would be on the issue. Trump's rival for the White House, U.S. President Joe Biden, is a devout Catholic, but as president had stood firm in his support for abortion access. Democrats have been leaning strongly into the issue, characterizing Trump as the architect of attacks on reproductive rights while vowing to reinstate Roe. In his video, Trump repeated earlier comments that, like former Republican President Ronald Reagan, when it comes to abortion, he is strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. After beholding the midday darkness of a total solar eclipse that raced across the continent, thousands of spectators in New England were struck seeing only brake lights Monday night as highway traffic backed up for hours. Crowds of motorists leaving remote northern New Hampshire in the late afternoon clogged local roads leading to Interstate 93, which they found also thronged by cars inching southward. By midnight, some drivers had traveled only 15 miles in 9 hours. The New Hampshire Department of Transportation urged patience and said there were about 22,000 more vehicles visiting the tiny state compared to the same last year. Heavy traffic was also reported in Vermont and Massachusetts. For those unlucky travelers, the gridlock made for a frustrating end to a thrilling day for those fortunate enough to glimpse the spectacle of the eclipse through clear skies. Street lights blinked on the planet and came into view as the moon shrouded the sun for a few minutes. Across the land, dogs howled, frogs croaked, and some people wept, all parts of the eclipse mania, reaping Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. Almost everyone in North America could see at least a partial eclipse, weather permitting. It was the continent's biggest eclipse audience ever, with a couple hundred million people living in or near the shadow's path, plus scores of out-of-towners flocking in to see it. With the next coast-to-coast eclipse 21 years out, the pressure was on to catch this one. Clouds blanketed most of Texas as the total solar eclipse began its diagonal dash across land, starting along Mexico's mostly clear Pacific coast and aiming for Texas and 14 other U.S. states before exiting into the North Atlantic near Newfoundland. "We are really lucky," said Georgetown resident Susan Robertson. "Even with the clouds, it is kind of nice because when it clears up, it is like, wow, I will never unsee this," said Ahmed Hussein of Austin, who had eclipse on his calendar for a year. Just east of Dallas, the hundreds gathered at Mesquite's downtown area cheered and whistled as the clouds parted in the final minutes before totality. As the sun finally became cloaked, the crowd grew louder, whipping off their eclipse glasses to cloak in the unforgettable view of the sun's corona or spiky outer atmosphere and Venus shining brilliantly off into the right. Protesters in southern Mexico set the state government building afire Monday and torched at least a dozen cars in the parking lot. The protest occurred in the violence-racked city of Chilpancingo, the capital of the Pacific Coast state of Guerrero. The protesters were demanding answers in the case of 43 students at a rural teachers' college who disappeared in 2014. Another student from that college was killed in a confrontation with police in March. The Guerrero state government said in a statement that it regrets and condemns the violent acts. The government noted that the state interior secretary had resigned following the March confrontation with students. The police officers involved are under investigation into death. Images of the protest showed at least a dozen vehicles engulfed in fire and flames shooting out of the windows of the state office building, which is near the main highway leading from Mexico City to Acapulco. The building, which houses the governor's office, was ransacked. Students at the radical Ayotzinapa Teachers College, located on the outskirts of Chilpancingo, are known for their violent protests, which often involve hijacking buses and delivery trucks. In March, protesters had allied with the college commandeered a pickup truck and used it to ram down the wooden doors of Mexico City's National Palace. They battered down the doors and entered the colonial-era palace where the president lives and holds his daily press briefings, before they were driven off by security agents. The palace is a historic structure dating back to the 1700s and was built on the site of the Aztec emperor's palace. The demonstration, like many others over the years, was called to protest the abduction and murder of 43 students a decade ago. The mass disappearance remains one of Mexico's most infamous human rights cases. Haiti's National Police Agency says that it has recovered a hijacked cargo ship laden with rice following a gun battle with gangs that lasted more than 5 hours. 2 police officers were injured and an undetermined number of gang members were killed in the shootout that occurred Saturday off the coast of the capital, Port-au-Prince, authorities said in a statement. It was a rare victory for an underfunded police department and that has struggled to quell gang violence following a spate of attacks that began February 29th. Police said in the statement Sunday that those responsible for the hijacking were members of 2 gangs named the 5 Seconds and the Taliban gang. They said gunmen seized the transport ship Magali on Thursday as it departed the port of Varu. Radio Telemetronome reported that the gangs kidnapped everyone aboard the ship and stole some 10,000 sacks of rice out of the 60,000 sacks it was carrying. The ship was headed to the northern coastal city of Cap Haïtien. On Sunday, online news site Radiography reported that the Taliban gang used the front loader to demolish a police station in the Port-au-Prince suburb of Canaan, where at least 4 police officers were killed in a recent attack. The station was no longer operational. Gang violence continued on Monday, with police using megaphones to order the evacuation of the Champ de Mars area near the National Palace in downtown Port-au-Prince as heavy gunfire erupted nearby. The most recent gun battle between police and gang comes more than a month after gunmen began targeting key government infrastructure. They have burned down multiple police stations, opened fire on the main international airport that remained closed, and stormed Haiti's 2 biggest prisons, releasing more than 4,000 inmates. The ongoing violence forced Prime Minister Ariel Henry to announce he would resign on a transitional presidential council is formed. Henry was in Kenya to push for the UN-backed deployment of a police force from the East African country when the attacks began and remains locked out of Haiti. Brazil's Supreme Court unanimously voted Monday that the armed forces have no constitutional power to intervene in disputes between government branches, a largely symbolic decision aimed at bolstering democracy after years of increasing threat of military intervention. The court's decision came in response to an argument that right-wing former President Jair Bolsonaro and his allies deployed in recent years. They have claimed that Article 142 of Brazil's constitution affords the military so-called moderating power between the executive, legislative and judicial branches. Bolsonaro presented this interpretation in an April 2020 meeting with his ministers, telling them that any of the 3 powers can request the armed forces to take action to restore order in Brazil. In the years since, posters invoking Article 142 became a fixture at rallies calling for military takeover and culminated in an uprising by Bolsonaro supporters seeking to summon the military to oust his successor from power. All of the 11 justices, including both justices appointed by Bolsonaro, rejected that thesis. While the Constitution empowers the military to protect the nation from threats and guarantee constitutional powers that does not comport with any interpretation that allows the use of the armed forces for the defense of one power against the other. The case's rapporteur, Justice Louis Fox, wrote this in his vote. Article 142's vague wording had allowed route for some interpretation, although the one espoused by Brazil's far right was absolutely crazy, said João Gabriel Pontes, a constitutional lawyer at Daniel Cimento e Ademar Borges in Rio de Janeiro. This is not a Supreme Court ruling that will safeguard Brazilian democracy from new attacks, Pontes said by phone. However, it sends an important message to society that a military intervention has no constitutional basis. The Constitution dates from 1988, 3 years after the country cast off its 21-year military dictatorship. Bolsonaro's 2018 election, in a sense, marked the return of the armed forces to power. The former army captain, who openly waxed nostalgic for the dictatorship era, appointed high-ranking officers to his cabinet, and thousands of active duty service members and reservists took civilian positions throughout his administration. For his 2022 re-election bid, he tapped the general and as his running mate and tasked the military with auditing electronic voting machines, whose reliability he cast doubt upon without ever providing evidence. Following his defeat to leftist rival Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, his supporters set up camp outside military barracks for months to demand military intervention. Bolsonaro never conceded defeat nor asked them to demobilize, and on January 8, 2023, they stormed the capital, Brasilia, invading and vandalizing the Supreme Court Congress and the presidential palace. The trial of 27 people charged in connection with the worldwide Panama Papers money laundering started Monday in a Panamanian criminal court. Those on trial include the owners of the Mossack Fonseca law firm that was at the heart of the 2016 massive document leak. The Panama Papers include a collection of 11 million secret financial documents that illustrate how some of the world's richest people hide their money. The repercussions of the leaks have been far-ranging, prompting the resignation of the Prime Minister of Iceland and bringing scrutiny to the leaders of Argentina and Ukraine, Chinese politicians and Russian President Vladimir Putin, among others. The often delayed trial opened Monday with lawyers Jurgen Mossack, Ramon Fonseca and other former representatives, lawyers or ex-employees of the firm facing money laundering charges. Mossack was present in the courtroom and said, "I am not guilty of such acts." Lawyers for Fonseca said he was in a hospital in Panama. The case centers on allegations the firm set up shell companies to acquire properties in Panama with money from a sprawling corruption scheme in Brazil known as the Car Wash, or Lava Jato in Portuguese. Fonseca has said the firm, which closed in 2018, had no control over how its client might use offshore vehicles created for them. Both Mossack and Fonseca have Panamanian citizenship, and Panama does not extradite its own citizens. The two were acquitted on other charges in 2022. The records were first leaked to the press and were shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which began publishing collaborative efforts with news organizations in 2016. U.S. federal prosecutors have alleged that Mossack Fonseca conspired to circumvent American laws to maintain the wealth of its clients and conceal tax dollars owed to the IRS. They allege the scheme dates to 2000 and involved sham foundations and shell companies in Panama, Hong Kong, and the British Virgin Islands. Australia has appointed retired National Defence Chief Mark Binskin to look into how Israel Defence Forces came to kill 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers, including Australian Zomi Francom, in Gaza last week. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said Monday he expected Israel would fully cooperate with Binskin as Australia's special advisor on Israel's response to the missile strikes on 3 aid vehicles. We would expect that someone of Mr. Binskin's stature, frankly, will be given every cooperation from the Israel Defense Forces and the Israeli government, Albanese told press. We don't find the explanations to be satisfactory to this point, Albanese added. The 7 aid workers' death had shaken the world, Albanese said, adding it is unacceptable that almost 200 aid workers have died since the conflict began in October last year. Binskin, who served as Australian Defence Force Chief from 2014 to 2018, will advise the government on the sufficiency and appropriateness of steps taken by the Israeli government in response to the fatal attack, which the Israeli military has described as a tragic error, a government statement said. And that's the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. Kenya, rescue operations underway after rains cause floodwaters. Gaza Health Ministry reports 32 people killed in 24 hours. Bangladesh, Japan to spend $2 million to help Rohingya. Austria, Russian infiltration revealed as authorities arrest spy. United States, crowd witness total solar eclipse. Australia, government appoints ex-defense chief to investigate Israeli strike. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms on X, Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube Atlantic Television Network, Instagram Atlantic TV Network, or you can watch us live on our website atlanticnetwork.tv. Do remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics,